or Zionists who have not to be Jewish to be Zionists, as Hassan Tamimi pointed out. Zionism is an idea widespread, and so it is in governance and media. We will highlight how selective framing and omissions influence public perception and governmental policies. We will additionally discuss the resilience of the Palestinian liberation movement, emphasizing strategies for grassroots activism and widespread into the society solidarity with Palestine, and the importance of uniting diverse communities to advocate for justice and support Palestinian rights and resistance. This panel was not planned exactly like this. With me, my dear comrade Lara Laila was planned to be my co-moderator. Unfortunately, she couldn't get on a plane to come here. Austrian Airlines asked, "Where are you going to?" And we named the Palestine Congress. And because of a misbooking regarding the name of Lara, the surname of Lara, a renewal of the ticket was denied to her. So this is how mechanisms of exclusion and repressing work here. So in our hearts and minds, we stand in solidarity with Lara. You are here with us, and we are there with you, because we cannot be divided by such cruel mechanisms and stupid mechanisms to be here. So instead of Lara will be Irina Vana moderating this panel, and I will now give the word to her to introduce to the speeches. Thank you.
Well, yes, I will co-moderate together with Martin, but I have the honor to introduce some of our speakers. So the first one is Jamal. She's a Palestinian journalist, and she's doing a documentary on the racist repression against the pro-Palestinian movement and the Palestinian people. I guess she can be more detailed on that. Thank you, Ted, for being here with us. And I would just start right into, please give us a short introduction on your activism.
Hello everyone. First off, thank you so much for inviting me here. And I'll of course go right into my introductory remarks. So as you know, was mentioned, my name is Hibat Jamal. I am a Palestinian who currently lives in Germany, but I originally am from New York. I grew up in New York. I went to CUNY, City College of New York. I was part of the Students for Justice in Palestine there, very active in the activism scene. We did protests for years and years around the same issues of 77 years of genocide and apartheid and occupation. More specifically, I'm from the Bronx, and it's of course a tough place to be a part of, but what it is that it's filled with people from multicultural backgrounds and identities. It's a diverse place to live. And the one thing that is so strong in New York is this concept of freedom of expression. That's the thing that's commonplace. So if someone curses at you in the train, you just curse right back. You don't file an uncycle with the police. That's not how it works there. You fight back. You say what you need to say. Your opinions, matter to some extent. Don't get me wrong. maybe this perception of freedom of speech is what allows billions of dollars to go to Israel. Maybe this is all an illusion of what your identity and identity politics and the concept of saying your mind is what gives our country the ability to support Israel in the way that it does. But with the law, your thoughts was still strong. It was still a strong virtue. No one can control how you thought. There was no law that said that they can control how you thought. And then I moved to Germany in 2020. And I realized I lived in a state that does want to control how you think, that does want to control what you say, how you defend yourself, that wants to control your support to the Palestinian people. I moved to Germany, a state that is desperate to redefine itself, and it is stuck in a delusional psychosis. And this became, thank you, and this was extremely apparent to me, and in earlier this year, there was the Palestine Congress in Berlin, and I was also a speaker there. I was the first and last speaker at the Palestine Congress in Berlin. After I opened up the introductory remarks of the Congress, it was immediately stormed by police, by Berlin police. Hundreds of police were now in this wedding hall and banned the Congress from continuing. And it was there that I realized that Germany is obsessed with control, obsessed with wanting to redefine itself, is obsessed with having democracy and democratic values for some, as long as us pesky Palestinians, migrants, Arabs don't overshadow the homogeneity of what Germany is. In 2022, I visited Gaza with my husband and his family, and I finally understood what it meant to be home. I understood why Palestinians for generations want to return home. I understood the love that they had for their land. The air felt different, its soil felt different, the trees felt different. It solidified this idea that I wanted to stay in Gaza for the rest of my life, and I had that planned out. And of course, a year later, all of that changed. But I want to specifically allow you to understand this scenario. So I'm not sure, I hope I'm not taking too much time, please stop me if I am, but I want you to understand this specific situation. For Palestinians, specifically Palestinians with family in Gaza, so of course my husband's family in Gaza, and I fell in love with all of them, but this new thing I realized is when you have family in Gaza, you don't get your news from Al Jazeera, you don't get necessarily your news from social media. What happens is you have these Telegram channels. And with these Telegram channels, you have, specific journalists within Gaza who are, reporting on where exactly a bomb is dropped, right? So not necessarily, especially in the beginning of the genocide, when we couldn't speak to our relatives, bombs would drop on people's homes and places, and we would try to figure out which part of Palestine is being destroyed. And we would look through these Telegram channels, and they would say, okay, airstrikes in Deir al-Balah, airstrikes in Khan Yunis, airstrikes in Rafah. And from the specific street name, we would then figure out if they bombed our home or not. And so I was walking in Mannheim, Germany, where I live, and I was looking at, there was this hotel that had the television screen as I was walking by, and it was talking about, Germany's commitment to Israel, and it had all of these, it was literally talking about Germany's commitment to Israel and Hamas terrorists and all of these things. And in that moment, we received a notification, قصفوا دار عبد الهادي بدير البلح. Like, in English, they bombed the Abd al-Hadi family in Deir al-Balah. And you have to understand, that, it was there when I realized there exists a horrific dichotomy where being a Palestinian is some sort of abnormal experience in a country that does not see you as human. You see that your family was now killed. In that same situation, a reporter is justifying their deaths. So the drastic nature of living in a surrounding is diverted from any sense of reality. And so throughout, it was also in this moment that I realized that Germany is a state in deep psychosis. And from then on, we helped organize a group called Zaytuna in Mannheim that does pro-Palestine organizing. And of course, me and my husband have been targeted by the state for this support. We are now blacklisted every time we go to the airport. We're searched meticulously. We went to Morocco and came back a week ago, and we were in Karlsruhe airport. We were there for over 2 hours as the police searched us and interrogated us at 2 a.m. to the point where they did not give us back our passports till they interrogated our taxi driver, all as we were holding our 2 sleeping children. And all of this to say is that Germany and their commitment, unconditional solidarity with the state of Israel and their support for genocide, they're actively committing genocide, is all to suppress and deny the existence of their own Palestinian residents. And as long as that reality continues, so does our activism and so does our resilience against such a state.
Thank you so much for sharing this experience with us, which is really horrific. We have decided to have first the panelists speaking and introducing them and then go back to the audience. So our next speaker is Andrew Feinstein. He is a South African author, but currently living in Britain. And he has roots in Austria, so his family fled from Vienna. He has actually roots in Vienna from the Nazi regime. And migrated to South Africa, where he was also active as a member of the South African Parliament for the African National Congress. And he also stood as a candidate in Britain recently, in the recent election, with pro-Palestinian stance, and we know how effective this was. I don't have the clear numbers, you have to help me with that. Martin tried to look it up, I think it was nearly 19% that you got, so really a huge impact that you could make. And he is working on the impact of the global arms trade. And Andrew, please.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. And first let me say what a pleasure it is to be here and to commend the organizers of this Congress who have put this together in incredibly difficult circumstances and who have shown not just great commitment, and I know most of them are completely exhausted today, but they've also shown incredible courage. And for that, all of us are very, very grateful. Secondly, it's wonderful to be here with the other panelists and with everybody who is speaking at the conference, and particularly our Palestinian brothers and sisters who are here from various parts of the world where they're now having to live. And finally, it's so great to see so many of you here. I wasn't sure whether we were going to be talking to a handful of people in Vienna. And when I arrived at the venue this morning, I was very, very pleasantly surprised. And what it says to me is that everywhere in the world, including in those countries who are trying to address their own appalling historical legacy by giving uncritical support to the world's first live-stream genocide, in what Heb so accurately described as a profound psychosis. It is so important that you here in Austria, like our comrades in Germany, are doing the work and showing the support and speaking truth to power here in Austria. And as was mentioned, my mother grew up in Floridsdorf, where she spent 3.5 years hidden in a coal cellar, which is how she survived the Second World War. But dozens of her family didn't, and were murdered primarily in Auschwitz and a few in Theresienstadt. I have had the great honor of lecturing at Auschwitz on genocide prevention for the Auschwitz Institute. But never in my life did I expect to be witnessing what we are seeing every day in Gaza, the West Bank, and now in Lebanon as well. And I lived under apartheid in South Africa, of course, as a privileged white person. But I got involved in the ANC and our struggle for liberation, which was ultimately a successful struggle against a white, racist, supremacy oligarchy. And we should remember that, of course, there are differences between the South African situation and the Palestinian situation, but there are important similarities. The most important of which are these are both consequences of settler colonialism and of racist white supremacy. And we are seeing the true racism of our own governments in the so-called Western world playing out in what is happening in Palestine, and has been happening not just over the last appalling year, but for so many decades already. And I'm very proud to be here as a South African, because it was my country who took Israel to the highest court in the world. And the reason we did that is to show the world, particularly the Western world, that the oppressed are now the lawyers and the judges in our society. That those of us who have overcome racism, who have overcome brutal slaughter, who have overcome oligarchy, are standing in this court to say, we will not tolerate its existence anywhere in the world, regardless of who the perpetrators are. That is the message that South Africa sent to the world. And that is the message that we all need to be sending to the world. Because let us never forget that it was Britain and the United States who described my former boss, Nelson Mandela, as a terrorist. But let us not be surprised by the way in which the mainstream, or more appropriately the commercial media, covers what is happening in the world today. Let us not be surprised by the attitude of our governments, who are not doing nothing in the face of a genocide. They are not just enabling and facilitating that genocide with our weapons, which are made with our tax euros. They are profiting from the slaughter that we see every day on our screens. How are they doing that? Well, the reality is that the defense companies of Germany, the United Kingdom, the United States, and other countries of the so-called West are the most heavily subsidized companies there have ever been in economic history, subsidized by our money. They are also the most corrupt companies the world has ever seen, accounting for 40% of all corruption in the world. And an enormous amount of that corruption gets fed back into our political systems in the West. So these conflicts from which we are profiting are effectively oiling the wheels, are effectively financing our corrupt, mendacious, racist politics in our own countries. And we should never forget that, because the only way that our countries continue to massively increase their defense budgets year after year after year is by ensuring that these horrific conflicts take place around the world constantly and continuously. And why do the commercial media parrot the nonsense that is spoken by our politicians? You know, I stood for election where I live in my own constituency against a man called Keir Starmer, who once used to be a human rights lawyer, he claimed. He has lost every shred of humanity. He has now become a racist, lying creature of corporations and other vested interests. But let us understand that our media is owned by the very same people who own the arms companies that are so profiting from what we are seeing today, that infuse our politics with corruption. So we shouldn't be surprised that they parrot the nonsense that is spoken by our politicians. And let us, and I'm aware that I don't have very long left, but let us very briefly listen to the voice of our media. When Lebanon is invaded, our media tells us that Israel has sent troops in response to. When civilians are bombed, our media tells us that blasts were heard, people say. When Rafah is destroyed, the media describes it as a limited operation. When aid is blocked, we are told hunger stalks Gaza, as if by some extraordinary mythical power, these people are denied basic nutrition. When apartment buildings are flattened and innumerable civilians slaughtered, our media describes it as a targeted strike. That is the bullshit that we are being sold. And it is our responsibility to call out the bullshit, to speak truth to power in support of our Palestinian brothers and sisters. And finally, and I will talk about this in more detail tomorrow, to see our politicians and the supine media weaponize anti-Semitism to defend the indefensible that the state of Israel is undertaking, is to me, as the son of a Viennese Holocaust survivor, disgusting, reprehensible, and an insult to the memories of the millions, including my mother's extended family, who were slaughtered by the Nazis. And let me conclude by saying that just as we in South Africa, because of the courage of millions of our oppressed people, because of the support of tens of millions of people around the world, just as we won our freedom, so too will Palestine be free. Because, in the words of Nelson Mandela, when he emerged from 27 years in an apartheid jail, what did he say? He said, our freedom is incomplete without the freedom of the Palestinians.
Shelley Steinberg, our next speaker, was born in Israel and raised in Munich. Studied at the Hebrew University in Jerusalem and LMU Munich, where she earned her master's degree in Jewish studies, Jewish history and culture, and cultural sociology. After an internship in the Knesset as part of the International Parliamentary Scholarship Program, I'm very sorry, either I'm very much too loud or after an internship in the Knesset as part of the International Parliamentary Scholarship Program, she lived in Tel Aviv and returned to Munich in 2019, where she is a member of the Jewish-Palestinian Dialogue Group of Munich. Shelley Steinberg, thank you for coming.
Can you hear me? Or is it? So is it better now? Yeah. Okay. So first of all, thank you. I would like to thank the organizers of this conference as well. As a member of the Jewish-Palestinian Dialogue Group, I know how difficult it is to organize events to this topic, especially nowadays. You have to face a lot of consequences and repression, so I'm the more grateful that it can take place today. So big respect to the organizers here. Secondly, I am so impressed by the statements of my co-panelists that I'm very happy that I kept mine quite short, so that we get to hear more of the others too. And thirdly, as I'm not a native English speaker, I prepared something in advance that I'm going to read out. So I hope you excuse me simply reading. In my statement, I would like to take a look at the deranged relationship of Germany with Israel, because it is this relationship that determines Germany's treatment of the Palestinians. The Western solidarity and loyalty to Israel has different reasons and motivations. While the US, Great Britain and France, for example, follow rather geopolitical strategies and state-related interests, that means quite factual ones. Where am I? Here it already starts. Germany's relationship with Israel is of a rather ideological nature. It is characterized by something called, in German, the Nibelungentreue, which goes beyond any reasonable idea. The term expresses the concept of absolute, unquestioning, excessive, and potentially disastrous loyalty to a cause or a person or as in this case, to a country and its people, even if that means their own downfall. Support for Israel no matter what. This is actually Germany's directive. Germany abuses the remembrance of the victims of the Holocaust in order to justify its blind support for Israel. It's abusing the remembrance of dead Jews while it doesn't have any problems to take action against living Jews and deprive them from their fundamental rights like freedom of speech. This shows how deeply anti-Jewish German politics is. It's actually more Zionist and not Jewish, as they always claim. This year marks the 75th anniversary of the constitutional rights in Germany. And here I must add, because I'm from Germany, I rather speak about Germany, but I'm quite sure that most of these things apply to Austria as well. So excuse me if I just say Germany, but yeah, it implies Austria as well. So this year marks the 75th anniversary of the constitutional rights in Germany. And these rights were written in 1949 in such a way as to protect the citizens from encroachments by the political level. But today's politicians disregard the principles of democracy and the rules of law. In order to curry favor with Israel and submit to it, the politicians, with the help of mainstream media, sacrifice Germany's credibility as a constitutional state. Instead of making domestic politics, they make pro-Israel lobby work. But German history cannot be used as an excuse for an undemocratic approach. Germany believes that it can make up for one wrongdoing with another one. But as Bertha von Suttner said, it would not occur to any sensible person to try to wash away ink stains with ink, oil stains with oil. Only blood should be washed out again and again with blood. Instead of dealing with its history in an adequate way, Germany takes Israel as representative for Jews in general, which itself is a very anti-Semitic approach. Germany, and I think also Austria, has adapted the IRA definition of anti-Semitism. From all possible definitions, why this fixation on the IRA definition? This definition gives Germans the possibility to whitewash their crimes and rehabilitate German history. The IRA definition defines anti-Semitism as a certain perception of Jews which may be expressed as hatred toward Jews. Rhetorical and physical manifestations of anti-Semitism are directed, and now comes the point, are directed toward Jewish or non-Jewish individuals. By that, the IRA definition gives the Germans the opportunity to move from the perpetrator side to the ranks of the victims of anti-Semitism. So the definition leads to a shift of positions. Now, Germans can ally with pro-Israeli Jews and non-Jews against those who are Israel critical without having to fear the accusation of anti-Semitism. Moreover, can they claim now to be victims of anti-Semitism themselves? But the exact opposite is the case. Under the guise of friendship with Israel, they can now take action against Jews they dislike and claim to pursue a noble goal while enjoying impunity and not having to fear consequences for their utmost anti-Jewish actions. Germany was responsible for a complete stagnancy in the development of Judaism in Europe during the Nazi era. While in the US, for example, different currents of Judaism have formed in a natural way, in Germany only Orthodox Judaism is recognized officially and seen as legitimate. Therefore, the Central Council of Jews is seen as the only legitimate Jewish voice. But this is in complete contrast to the basic character of Judaism, which has always been a very dynamic religion. It draws its dynamism from its culture of discussion. Disagreements and discussions are the nature of Judaism. The Talmud, for example, is a whole compilation of discussions and disagreement, and it's this very core character that is being denied to Jews by German officials. Claiming that criticizing the genocide committed by Israel is anti-Semitic means conversely that genocide is something Jewish. These Israel apologists aren't even aware of what ugly a picture of Judaism they draw in the German public. This is a very sick relationship characterized by ideological obsessions that don't have anything to do with facts and reality. The opposite is the case. The accusation of anti-Semitism serves solely to distract from the terrible events taking place on the ground and to delegitimize legitimate criticism and put critics in a defense position and silencing them, as we've been witnessing just yesterday with the municipal intervention against this conference. So in order to understand how political interventions against, German political interventions against Palestinians work and where they come from, one needs to understand how deeply sick the relationship between Germany and Israel, respectively, the Jews is. So that was my statement.
Our next speaker here on this panel will be Dr. Kevin Potter. Kevin Potter is a literary scholar at the University of Vienna and a researcher in the Department of English and American Studies at the University of Vienna. He's a specialist in the fields of migration, Marxism, and Palestine, as well as Palestinian literature. And he is the author of Poetics of the Migrant, Migrant Literature and the Politics of Notion. In his description, he describes himself: I am a huge nerd when it comes to narrative, representation, theory, and poetics, especially as they intervene in bigger questions of power, subjectivity, ideology, and critique. So, Kevin.
There we go. All right. Well, thank you all very much. I have to say I'm tremendously nervous to be following so many eloquent speakers and to be the last one. It's quite a difficult act to follow. I do want to just briefly point out that, so I do work at the University of Vienna, and a lot of my remarks I'm going to be offering over the next few minutes have been published in other places. I've written about it, and I'm going to keep my remarks very brief. To just say that there has been a kind of culture at the University of Vienna that I've noticed over the past year. It is a culture of suspicion, it is a culture of ostracism, it is a culture of cowardice, and it is a type of institutional relationship that has, for me personally, has disabused me of any illusions I had about what universities can be. I began my graduate studies in literature a little over 10 years ago, and I, like many other people who have aspirations of going to be an academic, you arrive with plenty of wide-eyed illusions about what universities can be. They can be places of debate, or they can be places where you produce introduce new knowledge, or they can be places where it's the last remaining bastion of free speech. Just saying that into a microphone, I see how embarrassing and naive that was. Partially because that is not what universities are. Universities exist to replicate a social order. That's how they've always existed. That's especially how they exist in Europe. They exist to replicate, in this case, an imperial order and replicate a class order. And that is what their function is. Consider the fact that in Austria, of course, here in Austria, I assume it's the same in Germany, although I'm not certain. It's worse. It's worse. But the obsession with titles, right? You understand this. You see how many people have a string of titles at the end of their name, and how this becomes a way of structuring your obedience and structuring your deference to people who are supposed to be above you and who see themselves as above you. This is weaponized in order especially to constrain the limits of discourse and the limits of research. This is especially the case when it comes to Palestine. A very small handful of us at the university dare to even mention the word Palestine, let alone mention that we specialize and teach on Palestine. Now, one of the things that happened to me was the fact that it wasn't the first, this previous semester I was teaching a class on Palestinian literature. It wasn't the first time I had taught a class on Palestinian literature, it was actually the second time I did. And every time I mention to someone that I am teaching a course on Palestine, or researching or writing a paper on Palestine, I get one of two reactions. One is a certain, "Are you sure you want to do that?" type of reaction. And "Are you aware of the history of anti-Semitism in Austria?" is what they would say to me. Now, of course, the implication there that I'm bad at my job and the fact that I'm derelict in my own engagement with history, I'm willing to look past that. The other is the more sinister one, which you're all familiar with. The moment you mention the word Palestine, it automatically translates to anti-Semitism and anti-Jewish racism. This is appalling, as we've heard before. This is an insult. This is an insult to the Jewish people. This is an insult to the Palestinian cause. But it is also a kind of regulatory apparatus. So I originally come from the United States. Universities there are all about sort of courting support from donors. Here it's a little bit different. At a public university, it's more about sort of neutralizing tensions between university staff and their students. What that means is foreclosing any ability for students to actually demand better of their instructors. And it also creates a situation of labor discipline. Now, one of the things that you'll very well know is that universities have always been sites of political struggle. Historically, they have. The University of Vienna didn't, at least in my experience, I've only worked there for about 7 years. There was never any activism around Palestine at the University of Vienna until this past year. That is nothing to be proud of. That is a disgrace. That it has taken a scorched earth campaign against the people of Gaza, an invasion in Lebanon, for there to even be a student movement in the first place, is something that says quite a lot about what the University of Vienna is incapable of metabolizing and incapable of doing. And it's just to remind you of the fact that prior to October 7th, 2023, it was already one of the deadliest years on record in the West Bank since the Second Intifada. It's curious why that never got the same level of student uprisings and student activism. I want to say a word of sort of admiration for the students for the Palestine cause. They have done, despite my previous remarks about how it's a shame that it only happened this year, many of them have in fact taken tremendous risk. They have shown a lot of courage. They have shown a lot of fortitude against an institution that has nothing but contempt for them and nothing but hostility for their bravery and for their demands against the university to relinquish its support of this genocide.
Hohen Respekt an die Studenten!
Now, one thing I also want to say is that I forgot to mention the other reaction you get when you talk about teaching on Palestine, which is this curious sleight of hand that people have. You'll be familiar with this. You'll get this, oh, isn't it a little bit too complicated? It's a little too complex of an issue. I shouldn't really be speaking about this. What do you really know about any of this? Again, this is a tick you see for people who have strings of titles attached to their name. It's how they project a kind of sophistication, sensitivity. I don't want to have an opinion on something. I don't want to be caught being overly simplistic. Yet, you never once hear anybody utter the word genocide, and you let everyone else tell you that it's more complicated than it actually is. We know what a genocide is when we see it. We know what apartheid is. We know settler colonialism. We know ethnic cleansing. We know that these are valid terms, and yet, relentlessly, if you're demanding that the university even offer something like a lecture series, or a teach-in, or a workshop, many of which have been attempted over the last year, all of which were suppressed by the university leadership. You know that this is just providing cover for cowardice and one's willingness to act in the service of a Zionist state. And the last thing is that people will also accuse you of not being a scholar, but they'll accuse you of being more of an activist. And because of my sensibilities, I tend to take that as a compliment, because I'd much rather be known as an activist than a scholar. But quite often you have people say this because it's regarded, and anyone who works in this field can corroborate what I'm telling you, is it's seen as a history, or it's seen as a topic, let's say, that is intellectually unserious. It's seen as a topic that is unworthy of a university. Again, this is an insult, and this is absolutely disgusting. Speaking of the replicating social order, if you think about, this sort of relationship to power, we heard a lot of this earlier about the extension of European imperialism. I often think about how this relates to the panic around anti-Semitism in this country, because what really happens, you might be familiar with what Amy Césaire famously said about the Holocaust. He said that the scandal for Europeans wasn't that it happened, it's that they brought it home. He said very clearly that what scandalized all of Europe was that these crimes were supposed to be the reserve of the wretched beyond the border. The moment they brought it home was the moment they actually cared. And he describes this as the boomerang effect of colonization. We are seeing that now. He's more right now than he's ever been. And this insight about the extension of imperial power and how the European establishment and the Austrian establishment is more than happy to act in the service of it is only proof positive to the fact that this is the extension of not just the military-industrial complex, but a class order and an imperial order. That's all I have to say.
After these initial statements of our speakers, for which we are very thankful because it gives extensive insights, we are now coming to a panel discussion around the three major pillars, as you can say, of the topics that were spoken of on this panel. So the first of these pillars is about the media representation and its narratives. And we will now ask for our panelists here some questions. But these questions are meant to be impulses for an interactive discussion here on the podium. So if you want to give an answer as well to the answers of the panelists, feel free to give a sign so that we can keep the discussion up here lively. And as well, please keep time in mind. So, if possible, keep to as is possible. Okay, please keep the time in mind. So, I want to start with you, Heb, and the question I want to pose is, how have mainstream media shaped the public perception on Palestine, and particularly on the genocide in Gaza that is perpetrated throughout the last year?
So I have a short answer and I have a slightly longer answer. The short answer is Deutsche Medien lügen, das soll ich nicht betrügen. Deutsche Medien lügen, lasst euch nicht betrügen. It sounds better when you shout it, you know, with hundreds of people at a protest. No, but really the answer is German media has aided and abetted the genocide of the Palestinian people. The media, in particular in Germany, this is something that I think happens elsewhere, but in Germany is very stark, is that the media is the state apparatus. It's one and the same. So what happens is the politicians and the police and the media are collaborating with each other. Quite literally, they're more stenographers of the state than actual representations of truth. That is the reality of how it exists in Germany. When a German newspaper reports on something that takes place on the streets, more particularly they report on Palestine protests, their goal is to dox Palestinians, is to shame them, is to slander their name, is to put their faces and identify who the leaders of the Palestine movement are. They have no urge to actually learn from the truth and actually interview them. But the media, in terms of this genocide, and how they report is also very interesting because it's complete state propaganda. It's Israeli propaganda. And in fact, they have become part of the media propaganda in our own country. An example of that, and Die Welt, right, a German news publication, I kid you not, one time, and it is still on Die Welt's website, you guys can search it right now. They have a segment where they specifically call there was a Palestinian baby who was murdered. They called that Palestinian baby a doll, and it is still on Die Welt's website. They called the Palestinian journalist Salah al-Jafarawi, they called him a crisis actor because they couldn't tell the difference between him and someone else. For them, all Palestinians are the same, they're crisis actors, they use fake baby dolls, and I kid you not, that is still up on their website. I know I'm a little bit short on time. But German media, in essence, it functions more as a tabloid than as real journalism. And they work, again, completely with the police. When they banned the Palestinian organization Samidun, the Palestine prisoner network Samidun from Germany, the first thing that they did after they raided Zaid Abdel Nasser's home, who was the spokesperson for Samidun, they called Der Spiegel, and they were literally downstairs filming the raids. They work in collaboration with each other. And that is something that is incredibly important. In 2021, Deutsche Welle fired 7 Palestinian and Arab journalists from their own news publications for things such as posting a map of Palestine, of saying that they stand in solidarity with Palestine. And they had someone, an Islamophobe by the name of Ahmed Mansour, a Palestinian who calls himself an Arab Israeli, investigate them, and of course the investigation was that they're anti-Semitic, and a majority of them have won their cases against Deutsche Welle. That is how you know that even in the court of law, the media is a propaganda oriented, and that's the reality that's on the ground.
Thank you very much, Ed, for this clear insights. Shelley, can you share your insights on how anti-Semitism is being weaponized in the media today? And how do you see this affecting the discourse surrounding Gaza, the Völkermord in Gaza, and broader issues of solidarity and justice?
Yes, I can share my impressions from reading newspapers in Germany. First of all, there is actually no reports on the Palestinian position that are not being labeled as anti-Semitic. Everything, and that led actually to a picture or an impression in Germany that everything that has to do with the Palestinians is automatically anti-Semitic. And this is actually the fault of the media, because there is no report on the Palestinian position without calling it anti-Semitic. You can see it everywhere. For example, in Munich we have one journalist of the Süddeutsche Zeitung. Before he writes an article about protests, for example, a draft of the article is already online before that he is at the demonstration at all. And the whole article can be seen before the whole demonstration is over. So he already comes there with a specific picture in his mind, or with actually a full article in his head, which doesn't have anything to do with the facts on the ground of this protest. And the kafir, for example, is already seen as something anti-Semitic. But I must also say that the kafir became a symbol for everything that is anti-Muslim. For example, there was the Spiegel cover, it was about migration. The article, the whole edition was about migration, Muslim migration, and on the picture you could see a Muslim wearing a kafir. That means it became actually the symbol for everything the Germans are against. And what was the rest? And the same is, of course, with the genocide happening in Gaza. First of all, they deny that there is a genocide happening, though there are very clear criteria, as well as when it comes to apartheid. There are very clear criteria. And you can actually make a list and you can check every single criteria is being fulfilled, and still they call it something else, or they deny it in general, and everyone who says the truth is being labeled as anti-Semitic, even Jews. So it's no wonder, but that is nothing that happened. It's not an approach or a notion that just happened now since the 7th of October. This is a decade-long brainwashing that took place. That everything, when it was in favor of the Palestinians, it was labeled anti-Semitic. So this is in the people's heads. And you can see it also on the news, for example. I noticed that a lot of times you don't hear anything on Gaza anymore. And this is when there is nothing good to report about Israel, they don't report it. Because they are afraid that then they would be called anti-Semitic, even if once for a while they would really simply name the facts. And that is the problem. And with the media in general, they apparently misunderstood their job description, or they didn't read it at all. I read once, and I think this describes it the best, it is not the job of journalists. Like when there are two people, one who is saying it's raining outside, and the other one is saying no, it's not raining, it's full of sunshine. It is not the journalist's job to simply publish both statements. It is his fucking job to look out of the window and to see what is really going on and then report on that. And this is the problem, that media don't follow this rule. They don't see themselves as the fourth power in a democratic state anymore. They are actually the state media. And there is this political directive. It is a pro-Israeli agenda. And in order to implement this agenda, you simply use anti-Semitism, and therefore you can also see it everywhere in the media. So this is actually more or less what you already know, but maybe a little bit more important.
If I could just add very quickly to what Shelley has said, because I think this is really important. You know, this whole weaponization of anti-Semitism destroyed Britain having a prime minister who would have halted all of our arms sales to non-democratic countries. And this is a man who I live very close to and I've known for decades because he was involved in the anti-apartheid struggle. A man who's been re-elected by his constituents for over 40 years, a third of whom are Jewish, by the way, who has huge support amongst many Jews in Britain and beyond. This is a guy called Jeremy Corbyn, who, there's a book that Jeremy and I have edited together called Monstrous Anger of the Guns, how the arms trade is ruining the world and what we can do about it. It is for sale there. Anti-Semitism was used to ensure that Jeremy Corbyn never came to power. A general in the British military said during the election in which Jeremy came within 2,000 votes of becoming Prime Minister, that if he won the election, we might have to stage a coup. British soldiers were using targets of his face for their shooting practice. Then Keir Starmer, since he's taken over the Labour Party, which is supposed to be a party of, I suppose, the centre-left, has expelled more Jewish members of that party in the 4 years he's been leader than in the entire history of the party, supposedly to combat anti-Semitism. Now, even if you say that Jeremy Corbyn is not an anti-Semite, or that one of these people expelled by Keir Starmer is not an anti-Semite, that itself is regarded as anti-Semitism. I've been an anti-racist campaigner my whole life. I joined the ANC in my teens, when it was a banned and illegal organization fighting apartheid. Anti-Semitism is a huge issue. And since the 7th of October, it has increased. But so too is Islamophobia, which has increased actually even more than anti-Semitism since the 7th of October. So too is anti-black racism. But the reality is, if we're going to use anti-Semitism in this way, we have effectively made the term anti-Semitism completely meaningless. And this came home to me when you see these completely crazy Zionist anti-Semites, like when Donald Trump's supporters invaded the Capitol on Washington, D.C., there was a guy standing wearing the t-shirt, 6 million was not enough. Next to him was a mate of his holding a cardboard version of the Israeli flag. And they didn't see the contradiction or the hypocrisy. The fact that Narendra Modi and Viktor Orban, out-and-out anti-Semites, whose political philosophies are built on anti-Semitism, are the great friends of the State of Israel. This is the madness of the world today. And so we are rendering these incredibly important terms meaningless. And we have got to restore the truth of what racism is and what it is to be anti-racist in this repulsively racist world that we're living in.
Maybe you would like to follow on this question right away. We have had some pillars that we want to address, but we just skipped them over. So, looking to the future, what do you think, or also back to your experience, what do you think are the most effective aspects that dismantle apartheid and of fighting against it? What are lessons that we can also take with us in fighting the racism and the structure, how Palestinians are addressed?
So, the first thing I would say, and first of all, there were some comments in the earlier panel in one or two questions about what the Palestinians should be doing. As a South African, I didn't want Americans, I didn't want Brits, I didn't want Germans or Austrians who had facilitated and enabled the apartheid state to tell us as South Africans how we must fight our liberation struggle, because they were part of our oppression. The reality is that it is the Palestinian people who must determine their path to freedom and what that freedom looks like. It's not for us to talk about two-state solutions or one-state democracies. That is for the Palestinian people whose land has been taken by European colonizers. And those of us who live in the West, who come from the West, who come from a position of privilege, and as a white person growing up in apartheid South Africa, that is the ultimate privilege. One has to be aware of one's privilege, to be able to act to ensure that that privilege is defeated, because that privilege is part of the hegemony of the white supremacy that has given you that privilege. The most important thing in our struggle was the combination of resistance on the ground. We made our country ungovernable through wave after wave of industrial strikes, because the fundamental difference between the situation in Palestine and the situation in South Africa is in apartheid South Africa, the state was entirely dependent on the black workforce, which was effectively an enslaved workforce, earning a pittance, doing the most dangerous work, which was in the mines, that was so crucial to the South African economy. So the apartheid state wasn't going to massacre tens of thousands of South Africa's black population, because it would then have to retrain tens of thousands of workers, which would cost it money. Israel does not have that dependence on the Palestinians that South Africa did on its majority population. But in other ways you make the country ungovernable, and we're seeing that through Palestinian resistance, and it's why we have a responsibility from our positions of privilege to support the resistance of the Palestinian people in the way that the Palestinian people decide to resist, not in the ways we feel they should resist. And together with that resistance, which is so crucial to this struggle, is boycott, divestment, and sanctions. The crucial moment that was the beginning of the end of apartheid was when the British bank Barclays and the American bank, then called Chase Manhattan, because students in those two countries closed their accounts with those banks, would not open accounts with those banks. And when the executives realized that they were losing an entire generation of customers, they withdrew from South Africa. and they held most of South Africa's loans. And so suddenly it became so much more expensive for the apartheid state to be able to get money to continue the functioning of its economy and its militarized state. And the quality of life of white South Africans started to decline very rapidly. And even the masters of apartheid realized the game was up at that point. So, what we can learn from the South African struggle is that we must be very clear in our targeting. What are the most crucial institutions to target that will impact the Israeli state the most? And those should be our targets that we all unite globally and focus on. And the reality is that today, because of the resistance of the Palestinian people, the Israeli economy is in the most extreme crisis it's ever experienced. And we need to build on that by intensifying BDS in ways that we didn't even see during the struggle against apartheid South Africa.
You've been speaking about the complicity or the ways of just following the order of how to speak about Palestine in universities. How do you think we can break through this ban that is built within academia?
Yeah. Well, I mean, as I've said, you know, there's something about the inherent hierarchical and entrenched hierarchical structure of universities that makes this an extremely difficult and extremely complicated, sorry to use that cliche, struggle. But let me say that it's a matter of recognizing that these kinds of struggles can't really be achieved. I mean, I want to first say that I don't want to give anyone the impression that I'm one of those academics that thinks the world revolves around universities. It doesn't, and that's a good thing that it doesn't. That being said, I think that there is a certain way in which people expect a certain deference to ideas and a certain reluctance toward what we might call fugitive ideas. And the fact is that when it comes to sort of people who follow orders, I think it has more to do with the kind of punishing structure of labor at university. Most people are familiar with how abysmal the job market is. Most people understand how abysmal it is to try to maintain your presence within these institutions. When it comes to teaching and everything else, everything relies on your reputation. And this matters, at least in terms of the kinds of things that enforce a custom of obedience and a custom of kind of expecting that people are going to look upon you with a certain kind of suspicion, and people are going to look upon you with a certain kind of hostility if you speak outwardly in a full-throated way in support of Palestine. So I'm afraid my answer to that is that it can't happen at universities in their present state. I'm sorry to be very cynical about it. Speaking as someone who gets paid by a university, I still think that it's just inconceivable in the way that they're presently constituted. You have to try to, and there have been efforts to, try to find and build out and carve out a space for not just debate and discourse, but for a genuine, active material struggle. I had the great honor of giving a lecture at our student encampment here back in, I believe it was April or May. I gave a brief lecture on the 1982 invasion of Lebanon, not entirely irrelevant to what's happening now. And the thing is that in that particular moment, those students recognized that the university was not going to offer them the chance to learn in a way that they deserve. They had to take matters into their own hands. And it was a beautiful sight to behold. Of course, it was summarily evicted by the police. And the rector kind of, salivated over this victory against the anti-Zionist struggle and the student activists. And just to give you a kind of example of this, it sort of relates to this discussion around media as well, because of course students were interviewed by many of the local newspapers, but one in particular interviewed students about the encampment on our campus. And they interviewed me. I'm at least grateful that they quoted me accurately. But when they interviewed students, you'll be familiar with this kind of sleight of hand that they did. They didn't use any students' names because they asked for anonymity. Instead, what they did was say, this student with blue hair says this. This student with a nose piercing said this. You understand what they're doing with this, right? It's an attempt to discredit you. It's an attempt to discredit students. It's an attempt to discredit the whole movement as if it's something unserious and unrigorous. And this is what you're up against when you have a constrained, when they've set the terms on which you can have this struggle, on which you can learn about these kinds of things. And that's the way the university is structured, I'm sad to say.
Vision that we have, we still saw that there's some movement against shelling. We have seen in some data, this is recent data for Germany, where you come from, that in a questionnaire, 69% said that they're against genocide, and still we see that they follow on the media, that they follow on against the solidarity movement with Palestine. So what do you think, what could encourage people also in Germany? I think for Austria it's just the same. We also have a majority of people going against genocide to really speak up. What kind of action could help them? I don't know, we tried to put them in action, but what would you do?
So first of all, I would like to say that 69% is a clear, a very obvious majority. So we have to deal in Germany and in Austria, I guess, as well, with the term Staatsräson. I don't know how you would translate it into English. The reason of state. Pardon?
No, it's different.
Yeah, I think it's a bit different. The meaning of Staatsräson is a bit different. It means actually that Israel's existence and security is one of the main, directives of German politics. So the thing is that in a democracy, in a republic, the people are the state. So if 69% of the people say that they are against what Israel is doing, you cannot call it Staatsräson anymore. You can actually only call it government raison or whatever, Regierungsräson. But the very fact that the majority is against it says this cannot be called. And I mean, in addition, all of us know that the Staatsräson is just an ideological idea. It doesn't have any legal basis. And it's funny that for this ideological idea without any legal basis, Germany turns its back to international, factual international law. So it puts this ideology above international law. And I think that is something that needs to be brought to the people, all this idea that they are the majority, that they are the people, because I think that people in Germany are quite delusioned in a way. They are not aware anymore of what their rights are, what their position as citizens, as inhabitants are, where they are standing, that they are the state, not the ones above there. The people don't have to follow directives, that it's them actually who should give the directives to the people. So that is something, first of all, I think political education is something that is very important. And secondly, I think it is very important for those people to find a safe space where they can talk openly. Just a couple of days ago, I saw a video on Instagram or some videos of an Austrian young woman asking random people on the street on which side they are, if they are in favor of Palestine or in favor of Israel. And there is a compilation of the German answers. And out of 10, only 2 answered in a clear way that they are in favor of Palestine. All the others were evading an answer. They were like, I'm in favor of human rights. I'm for people. I don't want to talk about it. That shows how intimidated these people are. It shows actually also that I would say that these people do have an opinion, they do have a position, and I would even go that far to say that they have a pro-Palestinian position. They simply don't dare to say it. Had they had a pro-Israel position, they would have said that immediately because they don't have to be afraid of repressions and consequences. So this is something that has to be shown to people. You can openly say whatever you want, and if you get to feel consequences for that, we still have a legal system that is working, as we could see in Munich, for example. So people have to, first of all, they have to be able to speak openly, even if it's controversial. But this should be allowed, and only then you can also get into a discussion with these people, and you can show them the facts then. That is actually, I think, the main thing that should be done in order to raise more awareness and to make them more secure also, to give statements also openly and publicly.
An die deutsche Staatsräson für Genozid gibt's kein Pardon.
Thank you for this statement, because this is also, as far as I understand, relating to the documentary which you have been preparing. Maybe as the last statement, before we give the word to the audience, or for some questions, what exactly did you focus on in your documentary? Because you also experienced yourself the repression not only during the Congress in Palestine, in Berlin, but yeah.
Of course, so first I'd like to say that, kind of going off of what Shelley said, so my film is called The Reason of State, Deutsche Staatsräson, and in 2008, when Angela Merkel specifically said that Israel's national security is Germany's reason of state. Israel's national security is this country's priority. It has influenced and guided their policy in the Middle East, in particular when it comes to Israel and Palestine. This declaration, of course, for decades before, there has been repression about the Palestinian diaspora, which, by the way, the Palestinian diaspora in Germany is the largest in Europe. It is the largest outside the Middle East and South America that exists in Germany. They treated them as, after they became refugees in Lebanon, fleeing from Lebanon into Berlin, they treated them by giving them doldum status, toleration status. Palestinian refugees would put their suitcases in the corner in the 80s and 90s awaiting for deportation, and a lot of them still do not have papers or legal documents till this day. So the Staatsräson, although it was indicated in 2008, the repression against Palestinians happens decades and decades before. I wanted to say, specifically when it comes to this concept of does the legal system in Germany work? My answer to that is absolutely not. Just to disagree. And this is really what my film is about. My dear friend and colleague, his name is Mahmoud, who's very active in my organization, Zaytuna. He, in a protest speech, said, "I want a free Palestine for all people, regardless of religion and ethnicities and denominations, from the river to the sea." That is what he said. In the Karlsruhe District Court, they found him guilty of Volksverhetzung and relativizing the Holocaust and inciting violence and hatred because he said this. He was charged over 6,000 euros and now has 120 taxes, which means that he has a felony on his record because he said that he wants a free Palestine for all people from the river to the sea. That is a travesty of justice. That is a destruction of any sort of legal system. The judge sat there and saw him specifically say that he wants to live side by side with people who do denounce Zionism and and says that they want freedom and liberation for all with equal rights, and she looked at him and said that you are guilty and you are equivalent, quote unquote, to a fascist. That is the reality that is taking place in Germany. So my documentary, The Reason of State, highlights cases like Mahmoud, but also in essence it highlights the Palestinian story where, you know, me and my husband are essentially fighting repression while reporting on it. So definitely please look it up. I would love you know, support for this project, and thank you again.
Thanks to all the panelists. We will now open the floor to the audience for some questions. I have one over there, but I would need Markus' help.
Thank you very much for the constructive contribution, and I have two questions, please, one for Eva and one for Andrew. Please, Eva, do you see aspects of colonial discourse in the German mass media, although Germany didn't occupy historical Palestine? And another question, please, to Andrew, please, would you please compare the discourse of Western mass media in both cases, in 1990s in the case of South Africa, and nowadays in the case of Palestine? And thank you very much.
I will just collect 4 questions maybe and then get back to the floor. So we had 3 questions actually right in the back. The one is the husband of Eb.
So, hello, my name is Abdul Abdelhadi. I'm Eva's husband. I just had a quick comment, if you allow me. My family is in Gaza. My whole family is in Gaza. I lost more than 30 members of my whole family. I lost my home, my house, my city is completely destroyed. I'm saying this not for you to feel sad, to feel sorrow or pity for me. I'm just saying this that we talked a lot about the German repression, about what the German repression is, about the nature of the German repression, about how it's functioning, what its roots are. The German repression is a lot of things. It's racist, it's anti-Muslim, it's anti-Palestinian, but it's also one thing: it's failing. It's not succeeding. Look at the Palestinian movement in Germany, look at the Palestinian movement in Europe. It's stronger than ever. There is no city in Germany that didn't have white protests, that doesn't have an organization. There is no small village in Germany that didn't see the name of Palestine over the last year. So they can repress us all they want. They can search our houses. They can stop us at airports. They can do what my family is going through, what I personally went through in Gaza in 2008 is nothing. What happens in Germany is nothing in comparison to that. So my message to Germany, my message to Europe is bring it on. Give us all the repression you have. We will continue fighting for Palestine until Palestine is free, until my sons, Malik and Ubaida, are going to play under the trees of Jaffa, Al-Quds, Akka, Haifa. So only together, united as one strong voice against Zionism, against racist ideologies, against occupation, we will prevail and Palestine will be victorious. Thank you.
Related with this relation, this
media and politics or politicians, sometimes I have the impression that there are some discourses to control the public opinion, but they have other interests about that they would not talk. So that was my suspicion, and my question is if you would talk more about the relation between media and some other economic interests for the politicians. Thank you very much.
Direkt hinter dir, Franz, und dann will ich aufs Podium zurückgeben.
Thank you very much. My name is Khalid Ghassaimi. Since I was born in Jordan, my mother Palestinian and the father Jordanian, there were all the time of our schools 2 planes passed to break the classes. And since I was born, and I can recall that Egypt talked in our behalf, Jordan talked in our behalf, Syria, Saudi Arabia. So many countries talking on our behalf, and we don't see Palestinians talking. This is a chance for the Palestinians to start talk, to raise their voices. As our comrade in South Africa, Julius Malaysian says, do not be apologetic. You don't need to be apologetic. It's time to go out of our spiritual prison. And we don't want so many people to talk about on our behalf. We want people to support us to talk, to give us the space to talk. Thank you very much. I hope you understand my message.
Yes, thank you very much. I do not have a question. I want to give some thoughts on some of the points that were mentioned during your contributions. So first of all, I think it is important to mention that the connection between the media and the state, it is not abstract. We saw this when our erstwhile Chancellor, Sebastian Kurz, he granted a lot of inserate, a lot of money to newspapers to publish information in his favor. So this was just one of the proofs that we have that there is a very concrete connection between the state and the media. And as Mr. Potter, you said, to the universities, the same is with the media, that they represent capitalist interests as the state does. So it is in the concentration of the public opinion. It is no coincidence that the Palestinian position is being moved away, moved out, because it goes against the plans of the ruling classes here. So I think we have to call it what it is, and this is imperialist propaganda. So I don't think you can say that it's psychotic that in Germany or in Austria these things are published. It goes by the interest of the rulers. And I think in this sense we should not tell the people that there is that they themselves are the state, but they should fight against this imperialist propaganda. This is, I think, very important. And in this sense, I think it's also important that we don't tell the Palestinians that we do not care if there's a one-state solution, a two-state solution. I think we should fight against this imperialist propaganda and said that the two-state solution has not brought a solution but has ended in the genocide that is right now, because there cannot be a peace between an imperialist forepost and the people. Thank you.
We have one more question, and then I would go back to the podium.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. My name is Nadine Sayer, and I come from a Palestinian family from Jaffa. By the way, incidentally, my father, who is 88 today, was born in Palestine and still remembers what Palestine was very well. My question to you, Mr. Feinstein, I'm quite often asked by friends, acquaintances, and also people who don't know me very well, if I think if there is a solution to the war in Palestine. Many times from Austrians, and I can always hear from their voices that they hope that I will repeat what we always read in the media, that it's a conflict with no solution. Now, in my mind, I always disappoint them because I think I know what could be done. But I would be interested, what would you answer if somebody asks you, what would be the stages to reach a solution to this perennial conflict? Thank you.
I don't see any further questions, and we are already running out of time. So, Andrew, if you start, and we just go through.
Sure. I'm going to end with the last question, but just very quick comments on some of the other questions around the media discourse. You know, the big difference between the media coverage of South Africa in the late 80s and the early 90s, before we became a democracy, was that in the world at the time, you couldn't openly support a racist apartheid state for a variety of reasons. Even Ronald Reagan and Margaret Thatcher had to hide their support for apartheid. And in fact, the apartheid state was getting support from many countries in the world. There's a brilliant book called Apartheid, Guns and Money, written by a friend of mine, Henny van Vuren, that deals with the amount of support that was going to the apartheid state. Today, it's almost the opposite, in that if you are supportive of the Palestinian cause in the media, you're afraid of being described as anti-Semitic, of losing advertising, of all the things that Shelley was outlining. The economics of the media are very important. So we've seen an inversion. The fact that we're sitting in 2024 and we still have a country in the world that the ICJ has determined is an apartheid state, and that state gets uncritical and unqualified support from most of the world's Western media, or at least the mainstream media, is simply a shocking reflection on the state of the world. We're openly endorsing racism, apartheid, and genocide, whereas we couldn't do that in the case of South Africa. You know, we had to speak up when 400 children were shot dead in Soweto, or whatever the case was. But now it seems fine. That's how insane the world has become. I'm writing a book at the moment called Making a Killing, How the West Profits from the Slaughter in Yemen and Gaza. But I was telling people last night, the book I really want to be writing is just a very short book called The Madness of the Moment, that just talks about how the racists describe the anti-racists as racist. The most racist state on the planet that hasn't been a democracy for 1 second of its existence is described as this model democracy. I mean, the world is mad. The people running Israel, the people running the United States of America, the people running Britain, in functioning states with a functioning democracy and a functioning legal system, these are the sort of people who would be in jail. But they're not. They run our governments. That's the reality of it. And I want to make a point there because it relates to the media and politics question. And it relates to the question that Shelley answered about the 69% in Germany. In Britain, that figure's 84%. Well, it was, months and months ago. It's probably closer to 90% now. Our politicians don't give a shit what we think. The reality is that in the Western world today, we have the best democracies money can buy, because our democracies are bought and paid for. Our politicians aren't running our countries. They're being run by corporations and billionaires. That's the reality of the situation, and I don't say that as some sort of conspiracy theorist. If you look at my book, The Shadow World, on the table there, it has 3,000 footnotes. Because when I talk about the millions that someone like Tony Blair has made out of his war-making personally, I back it up with evidentiary documents that you can all go to in the book, because that's how we should do this research. Because unfortunately, the reality that we can prove factually is stranger than fiction, according to most people today. Our politicians don't represent us. They represent the moneyed interests that are funding them. And we must understand that the media is funded in exactly the same way. You know, people like Donald Trump and Boris Johnson, who are the sort of people who should be in jail, not running for political office. These people are creations of the media, so follow the money. Look at financial institutions like BlackRock, Fidelity, and others, who own huge stakes in all of these entities, media entities, defense companies, companies that are promoting the use of fossil fuels, etc., etc. It's all of the same financial institutions. Our world has become financialized, and in the process it has become de-democratized as well. So the important way to understand any of this is to follow the money. The Kurtz example, you know, Benjamin Netanyahu, what was he on trial? Was supposed to be on trial for corruption before he basically neutered the judiciary. Was for paying the media houses huge sums of money to give him favorable coverage, because the judiciary were never brave enough to actually put him on trial for the arms trade corruption that he should have. And then my final point, the solution. There's an immediate solution to the slaughter that we're seeing. If Britain and the US and Germany halted arms sales to Israel today, in 3 days' time, the slaughter in Gaza, the West Bank, Beirut would stop because they would run out of military material. It's as simple as that. People are being slaughtered because the US, the UK, Germany, and other Western countries continue to profit and provide arms sales to Israel. That's the bottom line. But how do we solve the bigger problem? The bigger problem is that there is only one solution, like there was in South Africa. Yes, you'll get some smart political theorists from America and Britain and Germany telling us we should have some form of consociational federalism, whatever the hell that meant. There was only one solution for South Africa, and that was one person, one vote. What the Greeks, a long time ago, described as democracy. The only solution for the conflict in Palestine, and let's remind ourselves what that conflict is. It is European settlers colonizing the land of the Palestinians on the graves of Palestinian people. The only solution for that region, in my opinion, and how that plays out is to be determined by the Palestinians whose land that is democracy. And Israel has never been a democracy. And until we have a democracy in Palestine, we will never have peace and coexistence. And for those Israelis who are terrified by that concept, they should remember that in the lead up to our 1994, our first democratic election in South Africa, white South Africans were building huge holes in their gardens and filling them with tinned food and toilet tissue, because they thought under this communist ogre, Nelson Mandela, if he wins the election, their houses, their cars, their swimming pools were going to be taken away, their daughters were going to be raped, and they were going to be driven into the sea. South Africa has a lot of challenges today, but one thing is for sure, people of all races live harmoniously, in warmth and love, together in South Africa after 340 years of racist oligarchy. It is only white supremacists who believe that that cannot be the case in Palestine.
Our time is already over. Shelley, may I ask you for very last words or some others of the panelists?
I think this young guy who made some comments also on media and economical interests, I think this is very important. In case somebody doesn't know, we have the Springer Verlag in Germany, the biggest publisher actually. And here you can see the direct relations and connections, because Springer, for example, owns Yad Stein, is an Israeli kind of newspaper or whatever. It's a kind of like eBay thing. Or once in Germany you have something kurz und fündig where you could announce things that you're selling, whatever. And they make a lot of money from houses that are being sold or rented out in the settlements. There is a direct connection. So of course they will never publish something that goes against their own economical interests. So here you can see, you can take this as a representative example of how economical interests and media work together. So that is actually, yeah, what I wanted to add to what this young man said.
Thank you. The final words to the discussion we just had.
There was a question asked specifically about colonialism, so I'll answer that. Colonialism and German discourse. There is something interesting in Germany. There's a new phrase I've heard for the very first time this last few years. It's called post-colonial anti-Semitism. That is a phrase that was created by Germans because they were upset about the international solidarity that exists within the post-colonial studies that specifically describes how exactly a genocide in Gaza can happen. In essence, right, they believe that this is relativizing the Holocaust, because then you are claiming that, you know, Israel is an apartheid state, and that is something that is racist and anti-Semitic, and something interesting, because post-colonial scholars, what they do is that they specifically say that a Holocaust can happen again. Because the essence of it is the otherization and racism and dehumanization of a people. That's how the Holocaust happened. But in Germany, they like to own the Holocaust as if it is their own. So anything that describes it and contextualizes it is something that is anti-Semitic and relativizes it. That is the most racist and dehumanizing rhetoric that I have ever heard. So of course colonialism exists in German discourse. They are actively defending it. Thank you.
Yeah, I have very little to add. Everyone spoke so well and so eloquently before, so I don't have much to add. I just want to say that you can notice, again, in relation to what some of the questions people were asking, is about how easy it is in media and in public discourse to limit the terms on which debate can happen and on which discussion can happen, and the terms on which you can show your full-throated solidarity to Palestinians. It's something that often you'll recognize as sort of taking oxygen away from this ongoing struggle, because you know that it's a genocide, you know that it's ethnic cleansing, and you know that it's apartheid. You can see it with your own eyes. And the fact is that if people are going to limit the terms of that discussion, you're going to find yourself constantly having to take on this defensive stance. And you're going to find yourself constantly having to fight for just a few words. And I think this is something that you can learn from, because what I often tell comrades and I tell my students, the importance is to maintain a certain message discipline. If you find yourself in a position where you're constantly having to defend what we all know to be true, that anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism are not the same thing, that the Palestinian struggle is not a as this kind of obnoxious Orientalist trope has it, that it's this kind of 10,000-year-long struggle or something like that. No, this is a modern struggle born out by European imperialism and born out by a structure of Southern colonialism. And if you maintain that discipline, you won't have all of this oxygen taken away from you, and you won't have all of this need to be in a constant defensive stance. So that's what I would say.
So we are at the end of this panel about standing with Israel, politics and media in the West as an accomplice to the genocide in Gaza. I'm very thankful and delighted for this wonderful podium and wonderful panelists and their contribution to this panel. We got a clearer view, I believe, on how these mechanisms work and produce this kind of devil circle fueling itself. Like, as we said, you can only name it as a political media apparatus, intertwined and feeding each other. You cannot specifically say what it is, where it's or its origin, or what to do against it, but because where to begin, where to find a solution for this. This became very clear, but we have been shown by the panelists the way where we can go to. And we have been shown by the contribution from the audience what we can do what we can do about it. In the face of a genocide, what is a Palestinian expected to say? We heard it. Bring it on, bring it on. And repression and fantasizing narrative building for an upside down turn, which makes the victim the perpetrator, and which they accuse us of, as they accuse us of anti-Semitism. It became very clear as they accuse us of being Nazis. There's the same mechanism working here. And I want to close it with just a very small contribution. The Austrian People's Party here in Austria is the main government party and is responsible for the repression of the most pro-Zionist, and they repress the Palestinian Solidarity Movement. So in the forefield of this Congress, there was an article published in the Austrian People's Party party paper in Upper Austria. It's a very small paper, only once a month, and it's only online, but it was meant to be a starting point for a campaign against us. In this party paper, it's from the Austrian People's Party, but the Austrian People's Party in Upper Austria is also in the federal government. So in the last 5 months of 2023, Upper Austrian government financed the Österreichische Volksblatt, this party paper, with 240,000 euro worth of Aufträge. So they finance their own parties, their own campaign, and use it to fool the system of their agenda. Thank you very much. The panel is closed, and I hope you join the food break with appetite and hunger.